Good morning, everyone. I'll make it 10 o'clock, so welcome to this formal meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Councillor Adam Stokes, Vice Chairman of the committee, has sent his apologies for this meeting. The audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded on the County Council's website following this meeting. I'd like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until further instructions. Before we move on further with the main business of this meeting, can I remind you that if you wish to ask a question during the course of the meeting, can you please raise your hand? Can I also remind members of the committee to switch on their microphones when invited to speak close to the microphone, and switch their microphone off when they make their contributions. I would like to also welcome officers presenting today who are participating live via Microsoft Teams. Can I ask that you introduce yourselves at the beginning of your item or when you make a contribution, please? To ask questions or contribute during the meeting, please raise your hand virtually or type speak in the chat function. Requests to speak will be collated by the scrutiny officer, Kiara Hajia. I said it once this morning, didn't I? Hajia Anu. I said I was going to try it today. I hope I didn't embarrass you there, sorry. Please can you keep your questions and contributions succinct and concise, and can I ask everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent. We'll now move to the formal agenda. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. Trina, are you announcing those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Key, Councillor Sneath, we have Councillor Hall as her replacement, Councillor Stokes, we have Councillor Ashton as her replacement, Councillor King, I'm not sure if Councillor Bradwell put her apologies in today.
Yeah, Councillor Bradwell's not coming today, but I understand Councillor Rowe was coming in her absence.
Yes, he's said he would be joining in the chamber, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on to item 2.
Excuse me, Chairman, can I also say we've had an apology from Councillor Lee as well?
Councillor Lee as well. Okay.
I'm here.
That was Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I think Councillor Lee is observing on Teams, yeah.
Which is recorded as an apology.
I'm attending on.
I can see you, Councillor Lee. Welcome. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. Do any members wish to declare an interest which may have not been declared on the declaration of pecuniary interest forms? If so, please tell us now. No? Okay. So item 3, minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee held on the 9th of November. I'll just go through those for accuracy only. Starting on page 5, page 6, page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and finally page 12. Okay, do I have a proposer for those, please? Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Clark, and a seconder, Councillor Brockway. We'll now vote on those minutes. You're voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4. Announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. From my point of view, there's a shorter agenda this morning. Nevertheless, I'd like to ask officers to only summarise the key points of their reports and what is required by the committee. Have we any executive councillor announcements, please? Via Teams.
Good morning, Chairman. This is Councillor Corey. I have no executive member announcements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Senior officers, are there any announcements from yourselves? No, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Councillor McNally would like to speak.
Okay. Councillor McNally via Teams.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. It's just a quick update on the avian flu cases that have been confirmed in Lincolnshire. There are currently 3 confirmed cases with results pending from a further 2 that should be available today. A 6th location is being visited this morning and testing is expected to be carried out with the results likely to be available today or tomorrow. It's confirmed that we've been briefed by Animal Health and the necessary paperwork for the training standards team to do some footwork will begin tomorrow, and the staff rota has been put in place up to Christmas Eve, although hopefully that shouldn't be needed to be the case. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McNally. Just one further announcement for me. You might have seen there's mince pies in the members' room, so if you didn't grab one before, feel free to grab one later. Okay, so we'll move on to the agenda proper. Item 5, Fire and Rescue Statement of Assurance. This item is on pages 13 to 26 of the agenda pack and invites the committee to consider and note the contents of the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Authority's Statement of Assurance 2020 to 2021. The report will be presented by, I believe, Mark Baxter, Chief Fire Officer, who is attending today via Teams. The actions of this report is that members of the committee are invited to review, consider and comment on this report and note the contents of the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Authority's Statement of Assurance 2020 to 2021. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you all for taking time. And apologies, I can't be there to enjoy the mince pies. I'll have to bear with the ones at home here. So, in regards to this publication, this is part of our annual Statement of Assurance, which is required through our national framework, which is an opportunity for us to demonstrate governance arrangements across all of our areas within fire and rescue. So as the Chair said, I'll just go through the summary points of the Statement of Assurance. The first section in regards to the introduction and background and the county is really just outlining the county of Lincolnshire and the demographics and how we are and what type of the county we are responding to, and how Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue as a service is broadly made up. Getting into probably the main points of the governance arrangements of Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, particularly focusing on the first area, which is financial. This statement is giving the assurance to the committee that we are operating within all of the county council's financial arrangements and budget setting. We have that the authority's financial statements and value for monies are independently audited to ensure that throughout the year that we are operating with all governance arrangements. In terms of value for money, last year we ended up with an underspend of 103,000 on a just over a 23 million budget, which was well within the 1% budget tolerance. Within our capital programme, we did realign just under £900,000 from the original capital budget of 4.6. This rephasing was predominantly around the fact that we wasn't able to move forward some of our procurements and projects due to the COVID situation that we was in. So we've just moved those works over the next 3 years. I suppose in regards to an overview, where does that put us in regards to other services? We are still consistently, in regards to our revenue budget, operating as one of the 15% most efficient fire services within the 43 services within England when we're comparing revenue budget against head of population. In regards to all of our governance arrangements, Again, we've had the LCC's internal audit department that pushes its annual audit review. The opinion of the head of audit and at the end of the year was that our arrangements for risk management were performing well, and arrangements for governance, financial control and internal control were performing adequately. We have the chief, our portfolio holder and chief executive and myself provide routine oversight over the fire and rescue's activities. Key decisions have all gone through the LCC's full scrutiny governance model, and when appropriate, gone to exec for the key decision sign off. Within that last year, it's just recognising the commitment and the impact of the COVID-19. Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue has been fully embedded within the local resilience forum. We've been a key player in regards to responding to the COVID situation. Through that year, we provided support within mortality planning, PPE coordination and distribution of logistic supports. We also, at the time, provided the secretarial support through emergency planning for the local resilience forum. We also provided chairs to the TCG, dedicated sales, and also chairing of the strategic coordinating group throughout that period. Many of our personnel also supported EMAS in regards to driving the ambulances over this period to relieve the pressures of one of our partner agencies. And we also had a focus in regards to the welfare and well-being of our own staff that were also affected with COVID-19 to ensure that they are still able to carry out all of their statutory duties and responsibilities. And we also took advantage of LCC's opportunity to upgrade IT software and also hardware, and took advantage of the implementation of Microsoft Teams and video cameras across all of our stations, so we was able to continue with our business as usual as much as we can in those different operating times. So other area was in regards to is our operational assurance. There's a list of their key documents which links into our statutory responsibilities to provide and to plan for our operational response. The main focus from last year was a review of our integrated risk management plan, and we've now produced a community risk profile and a community risk plan from 2020 to 24 that sets out all of our identified risks within the communities, and also our resourcing on how we're going to mitigate those risks. And that plan has gone live, and we are now operating to that plan. And that went through consultation, a public consultation, and also internally through our scrutiny procedures. Was also ensuring that we've got robust business continuity plans that have been reviewed to ensure that we are able to operate in all foreseeable events, from staff shortages, loss of premises, technological failures, etc. A key objective is to continue with our strong collaborative partnership culture through we continue with some of our county council partners, particularly within sharing information for our vulnerable persons, launching a concept of Sherman, which is a way of identifying vulnerable persons, so we can work with our partners to support their needs. Within our protection strategy, we continue with our partnership with local districts, environmental health and trading standards and police, etc., to identify areas where we can support to give them data and information, but also for them to identify areas where we may need to look at any enforcement areas. Which the enforcement is still a key area that we are working alongside all of our partner agencies to ensure that people that are working and living within the built environment are doing so as safely as possible. Other areas within collaboration, we've still got a strong co-responding scheme. We're linking with EMAS and Lives. British Red Cross, we still host the vehicles and the support services to support people who have had the effects of fires in the homes. Bariatric response, we work alongside our adult social care at EMAS the Joint Ambulance Conveyance, which is an extension of our co-responding teams, and also the flood response pumps, which has been a partnership arrangements with the Environmental Agency and Lead Local Flood Authority. We continue with mutual aid arrangements and national resilience arrangements with our partners within the fire sector to ensure that we've got resilience to ensure we can respond to all operational events. What that means is if we go to an operational incident that's either near the border or cross border and we need to rely on other agencies' support, that will happen seamlessly. And if we need continued support at protracted incidents, we rely on our national resilience partners that will provide resources from across the country. Within our controls function, we still got a strong collaborative arrangement with Norfolk, Humberside and Hertfordshire within our control system, and that provides us good resilience in regards to ensure that we're able to mobilise and manage incidents to ensure that whenever the public can dial 999, they get a timely and swift response and we're able to manage the incidents throughout. In regards to performance, except for the fact that we give our quarterly performance updates here at this meeting, and I know the next item agenda will be touching on our current performance. In 2021, the main difference is we saw a decrease in regards to primary fires, which is really positive, and also within secondary fires. We had an increase in primary fire casualties of 8%, and we did have 3 fire fatalities, and that was no change from the previous year. Continuing challenges are in regards to road traffic collisions, and there were 403 people killed and seriously injured, and that is through, and I always like to state this is through our reporting year, which is April through to March, where the local, our Road Safety Partnership report from January through to December. But we have had an increase from the previous year. Okay, areas for which are now continuous improvement. We focused on promoting inclusive culture to supporting the health and well-being of our workforce. We've embedded a peer support team across the service, and we've also got a partnership arrangement with Supporting Minds, which is enable anybody that requires private confidential support in regards to mental health. They have a dedicated team that they can talk to, and if required, they need more ongoing professional support, then Supporting Minds is a professional body that can support all of our staff. We also launched our Thrive culture, which is ensuring that all of our staff understand the values and the behaviours of our organisation, and this work was actually built on what our staff told us, what they feel are the most appropriate behaviours that they want to see demonstrated within Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, and that has been embedded well within the service. In regards to IMT, as I've touched on before, we are obviously working in partnership along with the LCC to look at the Microsoft 365 development through into the service. And we're also working with a national project, which is the development of our emergency service network, which is a replacement of the current airwave system. And that is still an ongoing project that will allow all emergency service to be operating on the same communications network. We're continually developing our prevention and protection capability. We are looking at, and we have done in our protection team, increasing our establishment, but also increasing their technical skills and ability to be able to meet the demands of our risk-based inspection programme, and to ensure that we also linking in with business engagement and education in regards to the protection of our commercial premises throughout the country, throughout the county. And in regards to our prevention teams, we are getting specialist community safety advocates that are engaging across the county at our more vulnerable areas and our high risk personnel across public across the county. So then, in addition to our areas of, we had a HMIC FRS bespoke COVID inspection in the year that we are reporting on, and HMIC FRS recognised the good work that Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue committed to supporting our communities, and they were really positive in regards to how we engaged in regards to not only providing the support to the COVID, but also how we kept our business as usual areas running, and we still managed to maintain our statutory responsibilities during that period. We've had several assurance on bespoke areas for our urban search and rescue team, operational incidents, and also we have our internal audits of departments and stations, which is continuing through the year to ensure that we are operating against our agreed objectives. And our future plans are still within priority areas that we reserve for next year. In regards to the supporting of health and wellbeing, we are adding more of a focus, and for your assurance, we have already now set this up, having dedicated equality, diversity and inclusion steering groups and wellbeing steering groups that are chaired by myself and Ryan Stacey to ensure that we're getting direct support to all of our staff. We're continually in regards to improving our IT strategy to ensure that we've got systems and hardware that's able to deliver all of our objectives. Our prevention and protection capabilities, we are continually with making sure that we're reviewing our resources within our own team to ensure that we've got sufficient resources to meet our high risk demand across the county. And we are continuing with our commitment to evaluate, to drive an improvement, and that's through, we've commissioned several, evaluation reports from externally to give us independent analysis on areas where we need to improve, and that's in areas within our prevention activities, it's areas within our culture and wellbeing areas, and it's also within our protection areas. And then just the final note is that at the time of the timeline of this statement of assurance, right now towards the end, then the HMIC FRS is just about to start its full inspection of our service, and obviously our statement of assurance for next year will give that full summary and outcome of the outcomes of that inspection, and also what robust and effective action plans we would need to be putting in place to address any recommendations. So in summary, we're satisfied that the systems and measure in place with respect to financial governance and operational matters for the period of April 20 to March 21 were fit for purpose and effective, and we're satisfied that the business was conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards, and that public money was properly accounted for and used economically, efficiently and effectively. So as my opportunity probably now, Chair, to pause my voice for a second and open up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I appreciate you pausing, but you paused several times.
The statement
several times throughout that. So thank you, Mark. I appreciate your pause, but you paused several times throughout that. It was a bit hit and miss, but to be fair, I think most of the members got to the gist of what you were saying. You broke up a time or two. Okay, do we have any speakers, please? Councillor Gray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mark, for that very impressive and detailed report. It's very clear that Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue have been a key player during the pandemic, and it's been a great example of partnership working at its best, I think. I recently attended the Horncastle Fire Station at the invitation of Councillor Coroner, the executive member, and I have to say the knowledge, dedication, professionalism of the crew was very, very impressive. So congratulations to Councillor Corey and to Mark Baxter on the excellent work they're doing along. May it continue.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Mrs. Clark.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. I'd like to ask you about the internal review of the IT strategy, when it's expected to begin, and how often do your IT systems need to be updated to ensure that service is met correctly? Thank you.
Are you able to answer that, Mark?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely, thank you for that. And yeah, apologies if I do keep breaking up. I don't think the line's great, probably at my end. So in regards to the IMT strategy, we are, as we speak, working with LCC Strategic IMT team to put together a strategy for our IMT resources. In regards to how often do our systems need updating, it will be continually, because we have many different software applications that are, some of them are absolutely embedded with LCC, but there are also some that are bespoke to Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue in regards to the areas that we have to operate. Examples being our control infrastructure is a bespoke IMT area that we work within our partners. We also have bespoke software that links into our mobile data terminals that's allowing access to data for our operational crews and our prevention and protection teams. I mean, they're just a couple of quick ones. Even within some of our HR IMT, they are slightly bespoke in regards to the information and data that we need to hold because of the terms and conditions and the way that Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue is established. So I suppose a short answer in those two questions, we are at this moment in time writing the IMT strategy, but in regards to the reviewing of our actual IMT software and hardware, that is on a continual basis that we are linked in with LCC strategic team, that they sit as a standing member on our senior management board to give us monthly updates and reviews on the progress of any of those software updates.
Okay, thank you, Mark. You did break up at the start of that presentation, but if it did improve towards the end, but if it gets any worse, it might be as well to turn off your camera as much as we'd like to see you.
Yeah.
I'm aware Councillor Corey wishes to speak. So over to Councillor Corey.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at Fire and Rescue for the support they've given to the Resilience Forum and their cells and to EMAS while maintaining their statutory responsibilities. I won't repeat what the Chief has just said. And this hasn't been easy to do, especially while being inspected and while responding to updated requirements that were coming out all the time from the Grenfell inquiry. So I just wanted to remind people of that. And also, please remember that of the 38 fire stations we have across Lincolnshire, which is a huge county, only 10 of them have whole-time crews. So I hope you agree that this has been an exemplary response from Fire and Rescue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of questions, if I may, please. Reading the COVID updates that you gave us, obviously the service needs to be commended for its actions, i.e. driving the ambulances and delivering food parcels and providing support for its own staff. Would you please pass on my thanks to all your staff, and I'm sure other committee members would like to do the same. And on page 20, you mentioned Sherman. I know in other parts of the report, you've given us the full breakdown of these various abbreviations, but I still can't find anything about Sherman. On page 21, you mentioned the collaboration between Norfolk, Humberside and Hertfordshire. I can quite understand Norfolk and Humberside, but could you explain a bit more about the connection with Hertfordshire? Thank you.
I think from my part, I think one area quite remote from Lincolnshire was chosen because should there be some kind of disaster locally, you've got 1 miles away that can step in, but I'm sure Mark can explain that more eloquently than myself. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better now. I've turned the camera off. Absolutely. In regards to the with the Hertfordshire, yeah, it is less about geographical location, but it isn't to do with infrastructure in regards to what I would almost class as family groups. So serves almost similar makeups and risk profiles and ways of working as well. Those elements, as what the chair said, is wanting to have an area that is separate physically about the resilience for the IMT infrastructure, but it's also the physical resilience of each area. So that's why it is slightly separated. Throughout the times that we've been operating with the East Coast Consortium, every time that we've had to rely on the support from the other services, it has worked seamlessly, and we've not lost any our a really top class response for the members of the public. So it is an area that we've been really pleased with. So so in regards to the question, in regards to the Sherman is an app for identify vulnerable persons, and you are going to test me a little bit now, actually. So the and forgive me, I might have to rely on Ryan to make sure if I got the acronym slightly wrong. So the S is for people who are smoking, H is for hoarding, the E is for elderly. The R is for requires assistant, reduced mobility. Sorry. Oh, it's all coming up on the screen there. We've got the M is for mental health. We've got A is for alcohol misuse, and the N is for needing any other support. And it would have probably been easier if we'd put that in the report and saved me from ever trying to remember them all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on page 21, the flood response pumps, and to genuinely welcome the addition of the 2 further units which have come online in the current year. Quite simply, I don't think you can ever have too many of these units, given that when it rains in Lincolnshire, it generally tends to rain in more than one place. And given the considerable number of relatively small pumping stations around the county, each of which, while they're small fixed installations, are still likely to be of greater capacity than all 4 of these put together. What I'm saying is if ever one of those goes down, then this capacity will definitely be needed and will soon be used fairly quickly. So the more of these that we can have around the county, the better it is in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kaz. If I can just respond to that, we had a really positive meeting with the Flood and Management Scrutiny Committee last month, where we discussed the capabilities of their flood pumps, and really wanted to pass on my thanks to the local friendly council and also with the environmental agency to give us the opportunity to host these. And the discussion on whether more of these and where we could host them, and so that there's another piece of work going on this year to hopefully improve that capacity as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Still breaking up a little bit. Any further speakers? Can't see. Yeah, Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to apologise for my lateness. It was some traffic on the road, so
okay.
I got late by 5 minutes. It's just a simple question on page 17. I mean, the calls made to the fire and rescue was 17,836, and then they attended around 8,039, and we were left, I think, with around 7,000 calls weren't attended or weren't emergency. I would just like to have an insight of what happened with these 7,000. Are they not an important calls, or they were just calls of any sort that they didn't have to be, assisted? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Danny. In fact, that was the question I was going to ask, so that's one less for me to ask.
Sorry to go before you, Mr. Chairman.
So if you heard that, Mark, it says on page 17, 17,836 calls. 8,039 operational and 2,723 medical responses, it leaves a shortfall of 7,000 or so calls. So clearly some of those would be false alarms, but for the benefit of the committee, could you enlarge upon that, please?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Councillor. There is an absolutely a blended mix of reasons. They can be, unfortunately, we still do have too many false alarms that come through our 99 system. We have implemented a strategy to not attend certain calls from call monitoring companies as well, where we put the ownership as to ensure the investigate the fire before they dial 999. So that's a reduction in there. We also have calls that are not for our agency. So we'll be getting calls that once our control operators have screened what the actual ask is, it's more for either EMAS or it is for police, and there's been diverted through to the fire 999. There are areas where we automatic calls that aren't actually a 999 response, but we still run, but it doesn't require any response from fire and rescue. And also there is the malicious fire calls that unfortunately we still get too many of. So example with children that are children, and not just children, but other callers that come in where it'll quite obviously that it is a malicious, and again we do screen them, and where we may not be sending a response to that. We have the actual data of the breakdown of those 7,000 calls that can give you a bit more data-led to give you that breakdown of percentage of what type of the calls are coming through that we aren't responding to. So I'm more than happy to provide that data to the Scrutiny Committee post this meeting if that's going to be more helpful.
Yes, Mark, that might be helpful if you could, please, because again, we're breaking up a bit. I think we got the gist of that mainly. So just to, if there's a large incident and you got multiple calls, presumably they'd go, each one of those calls would get, say you got 20 calls for the same incident, that would still be classed as a call, would it?
Absolutely, Chair. So yeah, obviously, if we get any incident, large incident, or it can even be a house fire where quite rightly we will call it 999. That will still be logged, but it won't be classed as a response because we've already responded to that incident. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Downey.
Can I come back, Mr. Chairman? That will. I just want to ask something. On my way coming here, just between Sleaford and Lincoln, there is a flipped lorry full of asphalt. If you're coming from Sleaford, it will be on your left. If you're going from Lincoln, it will be on your right. What it attracted my attention when I was driving is there is no signs to state that that lorry could be a danger because it's completely flipped and it has 2 full tanks, I will presume, of diesel, and there's no signs to warn the drivers of any danger coming from the lorry because it's not very far from the road, and it's just when you're driving. I mean, how we deal with such a situation, especially we've seen that sometimes lorries can explode. If I can get an answer on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Dunning, I also saw that in the mist this morning on the left-hand side driving here. It's just in a field there and completely upside down, isn't it? I guess some of that function you mentioned is due to the police, but Mark, are you able to assist with that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main the responsibility in regards to that incident that you described will sit with the police and also highways. Our involvement can be twofold. One, quite rightly, primarily will be if there's a life risk. So either if the driver or if there's anybody else involved in that accident required any intervention that either needed them to get themselves get cut out of the vehicle or needed some medical assistance, then we would respond in regards to that. If we was on scene, we would at that point also assess if there's anything we can do to mitigate the spillage of diesels or any other contaminants on the road. However, if we've not been notified of it, because we wouldn't be notified of it if there wasn't a life risk, then it would be highways' responsibility to ensure that the roads are safe and to operate in there. But that would happen in conjunction with the police, because any accident, they would have been notified the police, and they would have sent a resource there to make the area safe and assist the highways team. We do link in with our control rooms, and if it's transpired where there are actions, for example, swilling the road clean to get rid of any contaminants on the road, then we would attend that to support highways or the police. But to be relatively clear, does sit with highways and the police in regards to that type of incident.
Okay, thank you. Can't see anyone else wishing to speak. Page 19, Mark, it mentions about the support you gave to partners to drive ambulances during the period of COVID to relieve pressure on the EMAS. Could you just tell us the state of readiness at the moment, should this support be required, particularly as things are the COVID cases and winter time, and how the situation at the moment, the situation could evolve again?
Yep. Absolutely, Chair. So as we're all aware, the winter pressures are coming up, and also with the government's announcements that they're requiring, or their aspiration is to ensure that everybody has the vaccinations and booster by the end of this year. So the preparedness is slightly different at this phase of us responding to the COVID, and we are engaged with all of our partners through the Local Resilience Forum as we speak on a daily basis to look at if we can provide resources to support the vaccination rollout. We are also continually working alongside our EMAS colleagues. I have a fortnightly call with the chief executive of EMAS to get I'll class what's called a sense check to see if there's other areas where EMAS needs support, just like we had done in regards to the ambulance drivings just over a year or so ago. At this moment in time, that's not a specific request they need from us. I think the focus is with regards to as and when and how we can support in regards to any vaccination rollouts and how that works. But we're at this moment in time working with all partner agencies through the Local Resilience Forum to see how we can best support that for our communities, particularly over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you. I can see no further speakers. I have no further questions. So despite the digression about various things there, I move that the committee receive and note the report and are satisfied that business has been conducted in accordance with the national framework requirements. Can you please raise your hand if you agree with that? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Mark. We'll now move on to item 6, which is a service level performance reporting against the performance framework 2021 to 2022, quarter 2. This report is on pages 27 to 70 of the agenda pack and brings together the quarter 2 performance for community safety, fire safety, libraries and heritage, road safety, trading standards and volunteering. The report will be presented by Diane Colson, who is the Assistant Director for Public Protection, Will Mason, who is the Head of Culture, Lee Surdifield, who is the Assistant Director Corporate, Mark Baxter, who you've already seen as the Chief Fire Officer, and Stephen Batchelor, Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager, are all attending today via Teams. We don't tend to go through these performance figures line by line, but I think if we take them as they come in the agenda, and each presenter can give us a brief on each topic. So the first ones we've got on there, page 29, is secondary schools, primary schools, and domestic abuse victims, right up until page 36. So I think Diane Colson, I think they're all your areas there. So are you there, Di, please?
Yeah, morning Chairman, morning councillors. So yes, I'm Di Coulson, I'm the Assistant Director for Public Protection. So I'll just run through these hopefully fairly succinctly for you. So the first page talks about the Stay Safe days delivered to secondary schools, and as you'll see, we're on target with that. I think probably just to provide some reassurance, obviously during the pandemic last year, we developed an online capability as well. So obviously with the uncertainty around what's going to happen with the Omicron variant as we move forward through the winter, what we do have in place is a virtual offering, so that if we do end up in lockdowns in the future, we do have capacity to maintain the delivery of those days. And actually that online ability has actually enabled us to increase our reach out to students and young people in the county. And if I move on, obviously you'll see details around Year 6 primary school children and the receipt of the e-safety workshops. And again, we have that capacity to do that online should we need to. And then if we just move on to domestic abuse. Now, I know when we reported at the last scrutiny, there was a request that we broke down the data in relation to the numbers of domestic abuse victims being supported through the EDAN outreach service into those that were adults and those that were children. So you'll see those details underneath that first table on page 33 now. So we've got that breakdown there for you. Obviously, we continue to support victims and children of victims around domestic abuse as we move forward, and you'll see those details there. And then obviously moving on, we've got the details of those that are supported through MARAC. So MARAC is obviously the multi-agency risk assessment conference process, and that deals with and supports the highest risk victims of domestic abuse. And as you'll see, we continue to operate that on a weekly basis, and that is a very much a multi-agency partnership approach to supporting victims out of situations of domestic abuse. And as you'll see from that table, as a cumulative effect, the victims that are supported through that remain relatively consistent as we move through the year. So I'll pause there and just see if there's any questions in relation to Stay Safe or the domestic abuse details.
Okay, we'll just pause there, and have we any questions for Di? Councillor Mrs Clark, followed by Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Diane. I want to ask about the e-safety workshops. If you could give me a bit more information about that. Are these fairly recent? Have these been set up fairly recently? And can you tell me which of the schools have taken up the workshops in this last year, 2021? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Those e-safety workshops have been running for quite a little while now. In terms of the schools that have taken them up, I may have to come back to you on that because I don't have the list right to hand, but I can certainly get those details for you.
Yes, thank you, if you wouldn't mind. And is there anything that we can do to help promote that service for the schools within our own divisions, please?
Yes, certainly. So obviously we run an LCC, a directory of all the inputs, both for the primary schools and the secondary schools that we can deliver. But yeah, more than happy to circulate some details that you can share amongst your local schools to encourage them to take that up. We do get a good take up around the schools, but yeah, I can certainly share you the list, and I can also obviously give you the details so that you can share that with your local schools.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Going back to about the e-workshops, what do you think generates the best results for the school children? Is it in-person presentations or the e-workshops? Have we ever done any assessments on that?
I haven't got the assessment of that. However, I think most of us would recognise that a face-to-face input tends to be more beneficial because you can get that better flow of question and answer and better engagement than perhaps you do online. So without having a formal evaluation, I think my professional judgment would be that a face-to-face is always going to be more impactful. But accepting that children these days are very much in touch with online, social media, so there is that effective reach in that way. But I think my preference, particularly targeting the schools, would be face-to-face where we can, accepting the current situation.
Okay, thank you for that. And again, through some of the reports, it gives quarters, first quarter, second quarter, and the fire brigade said that some of their reports differ in the way they break down the year. Would it be possible for you to show quarter dates at the bottom of the page so it avoids any confusion going forward? Thank you.
Yes, we could certainly do that. As far as I'm aware, though, they are in terms of the financial quarters of the year, but I'll make sure that that's included.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. This is very interesting. Thank you for this report. On page 31, when it talks about the primary school children receiving the e-safety workshop, it says just above the diagram that the ability to service these is reliant on capacity. Have we ever reached, or could you see a situation where we would reach capacity and be unable to deliver this service to any of the schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the safety and the capacity, obviously we try and have sufficient staff to cover the needs through the year. There's always challenges around capacity, but I think the offer that we put out is based on looking at the number of schools across the county and being able to service the needs of those schools. Now, not every school takes up the offer, but the plan is, and the way we work it is, to make sure that we can offer that input to every school should they require it.
Okay, thank you. No further speakers on that topic. The next topic is all fire related, starting on page 37. So over to you, Mark, for that one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to hand over to Ryan because I think he probably might have might be for him to report on that, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. My name's Ryan Stacey. I'm the Assistant Chief Fire Officer. My connection is probably a little bit more stable than Mark's at the minute. So I will draw your attention to three areas of our performance data. The first one being deliberate primary fires. So this is buildings, vehicles, recycling banks, caravans, that kind of property. End of Q2 data showed an increase compared to previous years. So we are now close to pre-COVID levels, COVID years being atypical data. However, we are meeting our target of achieving a downward trend over time. Deliberate secondary fires, so these are fires that do not involve property or people. So these would be refuge, grass fires, that type of property. These figures take us to the end of the usual seasonal peak over the summer months. We have seen a reduction in secondary fires, and importantly, there has been a reduction from 92 to 81 refuse fires. Refuse fires account for 62% of our deliberate secondary fires, so it is an area where we do target significantly, and we continue to work with Lincoln City Council fly tipping and refuse initiatives. The biggest reduction has been in grassland fires over the last 12 months, certainly comparing Q2 to Q2 data last year, where we saw a reduction from 41 down to 29. It is recognised that this may be down to seasonal factors in terms of the temperature and the rainfall, etc. And finally, I'll draw your attention to accidental dwelling fires. So there does continue to be a reduction in accidental dwelling fires. Cooking remains to be the most constant most common cause. However, we have seen a reduction down from 88 in Q2 or to the end of Q2 last year, down to 71 to the end of Q2 this year. And cooking fires continues to be one of the main focuses of prevention activity. That's very much a whistle-top store of the figures that we have for this quarter. I'm happy to take any questions, but otherwise they're the highlights.
Councillor Mr. Clark.
Hello there. On page 41, you give some stats saying that there's no identified trends. But on the fires that have occurred, do we know if they're in older houses, newer houses, rented property or owner-owned? Do you ever break it down in that way that might then show a trend?
Yes, in very brief terms, yes, we do. There is no trend. Actually, the numbers are relatively speaking quite low, but yeah, we break it down by housing type, occupancy type, the people inside the building. So clearly our fire safety activities are directed to be person-centred, not property-centred. Clearly, properties don't have fires on their own. It's the people and the way that they live within those properties that causes fires. So yes, we do break it down, and yeah, there's still no identifiable trend from that perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan, on page 43, it mentions about fly tipping. We continue to monitor the Lincoln City Council fly tipping and refuse initiative, which will allow us to implement over the other districts if similar issues are highlighted. Could you tell us more about that, please? I know it's just a little bit out of your area, but fly tipping is a scourge on our society in Lincolnshire. So anything we can do to help that would be helpful.
Yes, so as you'll be aware, fly tipping tends to be directed at district council level. So it's something that we do keep in close contact with district councils. The biggest hotspot for us is Lincoln City, which is where we direct most of our attention. The work we do there is specific fly tipping hotlines. We make sure all of our crews right the way across the county understand that they've got a responsibility to report fly tipping as and when they see it, which of course gives district councils the ability to actually go and pick that refuse up before it becomes the target of opportunist individuals actually setting deliberate fires. So it's a partnership that's worked really well in Lincoln City itself, and we do undertake that work in other areas, albeit there isn't the same need in the other areas as there is in Lincoln City. Of course, rural fly tipping, although it's a scourge, it doesn't have always the same arson link to it, because there isn't the same opportunist aspect to it. People, if people are fly tipping in fields in the middle of nowhere, while it is a scourge and while our crews will report it, there isn't the same arson that's attached to it.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Also on page 37, it says the Fire and Rescue will be linking with the NFU to further develop partnership working to enhance preventative messages and actions to try and reverse the trend. I have to say that's good to see. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so clearly whenever we identify a trend, we try to identify if there's a way that we can access the demographic. The NFU is one of those areas when it comes to fires in farm machinery and farm property. So farm property extends to stack fires, etc. So we will work with the NFU to identify what the issues are around stacks. A lot of our stacks are now used by power companies, which of course, clearly we will work with the power providers to make sure that those stacks are adequately protected in terms of security, which they do tend to be at the power stations. So they need to be taken from fields to the power station sites as quickly as possible to make sure they're protected and made less vulnerable from arson attack. We have seen a reduction in the number of stack fires. A lot of our fires tend to be agricultural machinery, and it relates to the housekeeping of that agricultural machinery. So again, it's about highlighting to farmers and their contractors that work on those farms the need to make sure that it tends to be chaff and dust that gets broken down and then attracted to greasy areas on those agricultural machinery. There's huge build-up, very hot areas of those machines. It doesn't take an awful lot to cause a combustion, particularly out on stony ground where you get sparks from flint and bits and pieces on the ground. So it is something we work with those providers to make sure that we're highlighting the issues. Clearly, there's a significant desire by those people to protect their agricultural machinery. These are often it's machinery that costs up between 100,000 and £250,000. So a significant investment, not least in the window of opportunity to gather things like harvests. So where the machinery isn't available, there's clearly a need to make sure we protect that machinery, and they're bought into doing that.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Just one further question from myself, just regarding the figures in general. I know we've always done it this way, and I appreciate you may not be able to answer, but why do you work along the lines of per 100,000 population rather than actual figures? It just, in my opinion, seems to overcomplicate things. Could you explain that one to us if possible, Ryan?
I don't disagree. Yeah, we discussed at the last performance and scrutiny meeting about overhauling some of the performance figures that we provide you, so that you have an ability to scrutinise our performance a little bit better. We agreed that we will work with Councillor Corey and Councillor Morn to provide an updated suite of performance figures, so that you can monitor our the ability, how well we're performing against our ability to undertake our statutory functions, and I don't think our current suite provides you with that opportunity. We're looking at putting a new suite in from April onwards, so the next performance year, if you like, will do that. The rate of per 10,000 per 100,000 dwellings is a really useful metric when you're comparing to other fire and rescue services, but you're right, it's not a useful metric when you're comparing year on year, because I don't think it's useful to suggest that we've had 0.13 deaths per 100,000 people. I think it's a much more straightforward way to say we've had 3 this year.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. So yeah, I look forward to seeing figures in that format. Can't see any further speakers on this topic. So the next one is page 47, visits to core libraries, mobile library services, etc. I believe that's Will Mason's topic. Are you there, Will?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. I'm Will Mason, the Head of Culture. The performance for culture, libraries and heritage is pretty much categorised by 3 continuing themes, which are the result of COVID. Our interactions through digital formats continue to be very strong above target. Our interactions at sites, which are primarily inside, are down on pre-COVID levels, but significantly stronger where there is an outdoor factor, for example, Lincoln Castle. And furthermore, it is still pleasing to say that alongside all of this, the actual response from the communities and our visitors and users remains very, very, very strong. So I'll briefly go through the specific performance elements. So visits to core libraries and mobile library services continue on the same vein that have been reported previously, that whilst COVID continues to be a factor in our communities, people are visiting our libraries less. However, they are taking out more books when they do visit. So what we're finding is that our issues of things like books remain very similar to pre-COVID levels. They're just visiting less often to get more books. In terms of the visits to the library website, as I said, they continue to be very strong, so they remain above target. Community use of libraries has still not returned since the pre-COVID times. These are the opportunities for stopping smoking sessions, police surgeries, etc. It's an important function of libraries, and we do look forward to a situation where the demand and supply of that returns to pre-COVID levels. In terms of moving on and getting the broad headlines of heritage, as I mentioned, where sites are primarily indoors, so places like the Gallery and the collection, when we compare to pre-COVID levels, we are still quite down on previous visits. However, when there was some reporting on a regional level recently, we were delighted to see that actually, even at our primarily indoor venues, we stay at or significantly above the regional comparators. At our more outdoor or more mixed venues like Lincoln Castle and the Museum of Lincolnshire Life, we are performing very strongly. So actually our visitor numbers are only ever so slightly down on pre-COVID visits. In terms of the fact that actual performance data covers not just visits, but those interactions through other methods as well. Although the number of physical visits being down means that we've not quite hit that target yet. these figures don't include the latest social media interactions. I think I've mentioned before about TikTok. So when the performance metrics are updated and we include that interaction, the fact that our most popular TikTok video has now received over 1.5 million visits or likes or clicks, as it were, I think you'll find that actually the numbers go significantly above target. And then finally, with regards to the feedback we're getting from our visitors through survey forms, I'm delighted to say that 91% of our visits are still recording that they consider their visit to either be excellent or very good. So once again, we are above the target. Happy to take any questions.
Can't see any. Oh, yeah, sorry, Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much. Obviously, visitor numbers are down because of the various restrictions and people's concerns. Have we got any plans for next year to do any sort of promotional events or coordinating with various visitor sites whereby possibly you could do a discount if people visit more than one site?
Over to you, Will.
Yes, excellent question, Councillor. We've got a number of initiatives planned for next year. Obviously, we remain very optimistic that the rollout of vaccines will see the impact of COVID and people's nervousness continue to decrease, Omicron notwithstanding. So we have a very exciting event and exhibition programme planned for next year, some of which I won't reveal yet because I don't want to spoil the excitement until next year. But at Lincoln Castle in particular, we have a number of festivals planned. We have a season of festivals, a festival for all seasons. And this actually launches around the Queen's Jubilee extended bank holiday weekend. And we are working currently with the National Trust and looking at extending our plans for that weekend to include the National Trust. City Council have expressed an interest to be on board as well. And I'm planning to talk to both Visit Lincoln and Visit Lincolnshire in the new year to see if we can't fold in other attractions and other businesses, so that what we're looking at is more of a kind of a celebration that covers the whole of Greater Lincolnshire from the Wash to the Humber. So that's quite exciting. In terms of that kind of discount for repeated visits, our main admission charging site is Lincoln Castle. Lincoln Castle does already have a season pass, which turns into very, very good value if you plan to visit more than about twice. Sales of that continue to be quite strong, and particularly as it gets you into certain events like Lincoln Castle Illuminated, which launched this past weekend, and although we're only 3 evenings into that, it's been incredibly popular, and most of the wall walk slots have already sold out, although there are still opportunities to enjoy the light trail and the illuminations in the castle grounds, although I would recommend booking early to avoid disappointment. And I think we will continue to talk with our partners across the sector to see what else can be done next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a very simple question. I would like to know, how do you measure the visits in libraries?
Over to you, Will.
Yeah, certainly that. It's done in a number of ways. So most of our libraries actually have electronic people counters. So we can actually tell how many people go into the libraries. On top of that, obviously, we do also record issues because everything is issued through our digital system.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick thank you to Will and his team, and to everyone who works initially in our libraries and community hubs, a significant number of whom are volunteers. The usage figures demonstrate clearly just how important libraries and community hubs are to maintaining social contact, especially for people who live alone, and that applies to borrowers and to our volunteers. And a big thank you to all our staff working across our heritage assets, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for your question. I was on the site visiting yesterday with Will and members of the team, and we are not going to reveal just yet, but there are so many exciting plans just over the horizon, and we are sure that you will appreciate what we're doing for you all. So really watch this space. Well, not watch this space because it's my kitchen. Watch that space, all those spaces, big things ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you. Just a thought as to whether there'll be any merit in presenting these figures as broken down, if not into individual libraries, but certainly into different sort of categories of location, appreciating that the dynamic of somewhere like Horncastle or Market Raisin is going to naturally be different to a Grantham or a Gainsborough or so on. It just seems difficult to sort of drill into what's going on in any one location, or if there is anything different in one location against another, when we're just looking at the service across all locations.
Will, your thoughts on that question, please?
It's absolutely something that we can look at. It's actually quite a pertinent question as we're going to be looking at performance quite a lot in the next couple of years. As I'm sure councillors are probably aware, our contract with Greenwich Leisure Limited to run our library service is in the second of its 5 + 5 year contractual term. And as we look to the future, and effectively what we're going to be doing is looking to a library service that continues to have such an amazing impact right up until 2035 and beyond. We do want to do more detailed analysis, and we do want to do more comparison. It's always a very tricky question. I've spent a lot of time looking at performance over my far too many years in many different sectors. And I was kind of minded of the conversation about fire and rescue and that kind of reporting as a per 100,000, per 1,000, etc. It's not always easy to do like by like comparisons. Sometimes it can distort perhaps what the situation is. If we were to sort of say that Horncastle got more issues than Grantham, that would need to be seen within the context of, you know, not just the population of those two towns, but also what the other library services were in the region. So Lincoln, for example, has quite a strong, I tend to call it the donut, of really important community hub libraries. So one would only ever want to look at the performance of Greater Lincoln within the context of all of that. However, due to the nature of all of those amazing community hubs run primarily by volunteers, as Councillor Corey said, they don't record the data in the same way that we do. There is no requirement for them to do so. So it could be a bit of a distortion. But I do think absolutely that there is merit in a bit of a deeper dive, should we say. So whilst we might not have anything quite yet, I would anticipate in the future there may be more information we could share.
Okay, thank you. No further questions on that topic, so we'll move on to page 57, road traffic collision statistics. So over to Stephen Batchelor.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. I'm Steve Batchelor. I'm the Senior Manager at the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership. I'll start by just giving you a little update, bringing you up to speed on where we are for fatalities this year. As of the 6th of December, there had been 38 fatalities on the roads in Lincolnshire. That compares to 46 for the same time period last year, 47 in 2019, 51 in 2018. So we have seen a reduction so far in fatalities. With regards to the data in the document, as I updated last time, it has been very difficult to make direct comparisons because 2020 and 2021 have been very different on the roads with various different lockdowns and restrictions in place. And so the movement of traffic has been different. What we did see in Q2 was 100 people killed or seriously injured compared to 52 in the first quarter. But we would expect that generally most years, January to March is historically the lowest part of the year when it comes to collisions. With regard to the child killed and seriously injured, we saw 8 in Q2 in comparison to 4 in Q1. What I can say is that so far in 2021, there has been no fatalities involving children in road collisions in Lincolnshire, which of course is very positive. It's been a challenging time over the last year or two because a great deal of the work that we do involves engagement in one form or another in trying to modify driver behaviour, and that has of course been limited, and we've had to look for other ways in which we can engage and interact. But I am pleased to say that in recent months we are seeing much more of our activity coming back, be that education in schools, the community speed watch programme out on the side of the roads, us attending events and directly liaising with people, and again trying to modify behaviour. So that has been positive. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just talking about schools, and in Boston, and I did mention that to one of the head teachers, most of the kids cycling, most of the time they're not having any protective gears, no helmets, they don't have any high vis, it's getting darker, it's dark in the morning and it gets darker quick in the afternoon. So do you have any correspondence or any interactions with schools to make the students and young people aware that they have to wear these safety gear so they can protect their lives? Thank you.
Steve, are you able to answer that one for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We do have a programme in both primary and secondary school that does relate to visibility and the type of equipment that we would recommend that children use when they are either going to be as pedestrians or as cyclists. Of course, the needs are slightly different. Most children in primary schools are going to be accompanied, and so it's slightly different to secondary school. And of course, that is one of our biggest challenges, is that that freedom of movement increases. There's a great deal more independence, that it's trying to provide assistance and advice to people so they can make positive choices. What I would also say, of course, is that a lot of our work needs to be done in terms of drivers and how they use the roads. It's really important that cyclists make themselves as visible as possible, but at the same time they clearly have a right to use the roads in a safe way and not fear being knocked over by drivers who aren't driving with due care and attention. So again, a lot of our work goes into that side of it as well.
Yeah, Councillor Danny wishes to come back.
Thank you. You know, when you walk around the town, and I always mention Boston because that's where I live, it strikes my attention that people are so careless these days riding bicycles, and that's a fact. Because on T-junctions, they just cross, on zebra crossing, they just go straight like an arrow. And I think there is a lack here of establishing the rules, and there is a lack of having a proper laws which controls the cyclist. And most of the cyclists these days, they think they own the road more than the drivers. So no matter how you're going to be vigilant and you're going to be careful in driving your vehicle, you will find someone doing something, you know, which is not normal. I have been in a car where a lady was on a bicycle with nothing, but she was with both hands texting, using her phone, and she wasn't going fast. She was in the middle of the road. Well, thanks God, I'm very cautious with my driving for the last 30 years and never have anything, and touch wood, I will hope I will keep doing that. But that's dangerous to myself or to other drivers, because that person, it seems so careless, and I own the road and I do what I want. You can't touch me. And I think we have to change these kind of mentalities, and we have to work on educating people that every one of us is responsible when they are on wheels. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter who you are. I think we have to re-educate people to use the roads safely and in better ways. I've seen also kids coming out of schools and they just swerve between cars. They go front of cars. Okay, our roads are so tiny, and we live in historic towns, which is the roads now are probably not compatible with our reality. But it's still our duty, I think, to work on making people aware that they have to respect other vehicles as they respect themselves and respect the road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I guess it's all about sharing the road rather than owning the road. But over to you, Steve, to comment on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand the point. I think that what I would say is there are examples of bad use of the road in all types of road user. And I think you are right. It's absolutely vital that we ensure that we try and change those behaviours to allow people to protect themselves and to protect others. I think the one point I would make is that the number of people that have been killed or seriously injured by a cyclist other than themselves is significantly lower than those cyclists and pedestrians that have been killed or seriously injured by drivers in heavy, big vehicles. So yes, there are going to be examples where cyclists aren't using the roads in the way that they should, as outlined in the Highway Code, and we do work to try and ensure that those behaviours are changed. But I also think it is, as I said before, incredibly important that we note that these people are on on two wheels without any degree of protection afforded by a vehicle. And so, for example, you mentioned there about a cyclist using a phone and texting. Whilst we clearly discourage that, and that shouldn't be allowed, and it is unsafe, the motorist who's doing the same thing in their vehicle, in their car, is going to present a significantly larger danger to other road users. So again, those types of behaviours are still important for us to challenge and change as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny wishes to come back on that.
My apologies if, my last question. This question probably is tricky, and I'm sure you're going to say that you don't have the figures for that, and you're going to email me the figures. How many people in our towns did report an accident against a bicycle? Because when a bicycle strikes you from the back, they go like an arrow. When you turn, you don't find anybody around you, and you keep it to yourself. You don't go to hospital and say, well, I'm bruised. You don't go to the police, I want to report an accident, and a cyclist has just crushed me. So how many reported incidents like this we have had in our county? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Danny. Steve, are you able to answer that one?
The councillor is right. I will have to contact Lincolnshire police colleagues and find that information and provide it afterwards. I'm afraid I don't have that. But again, I go back to my previous point in that what we do have is significant evidence where pedal cyclists, have been injured in collisions with vehicles. That information we can get and is readily available. I don't, unfortunately, have the information as to injuries caused by pedal cyclists, but I absolutely will get that for you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Brockway next, followed by Councillor Ashton. So, Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very interesting discussion, actually. There's something with 3 short points, if I may, Chairman. On page 60, there's a change to the nature of the report from some previous years, which delights me. When it's talking about child casualties, it says it is not appropriate to set a target for this measure. In previous years, we've sat down to this sort of report to see, we're going to reduce the child deaths from, say, 10 to 5. And my question has been, so 5 child deaths is okay, is it? And of course it isn't. It is a very inappropriate target, and I'm delighted to see that now is the way the report has gone. The second point I wanted to make was about secondary school children. I can remember reading a report about this, and this is a number of years ago, so it's very old data, which actually explained that secondary school children don't achieve a full awareness, a full spatial awareness of the road and road movement until they're quite old. The age is about 13, 14, before they're fully aware of the way the road works and the speeds and crossing and judgments. And also, that's made worse by the fact that they often cross in groups and their attention is on the group rather than the traffic. So I think that is something that's really important to recognise when you've got your 11 and 12-year-olds. The 11-year-olds are still really children when they go into secondary school. By 14, they're different, but they're still not fully aware of the speeds and the movement around them. So I just wanted to raise that. And on the point of the school, when I was sitting on highways in the previous council, I repeatedly asked for zigzags around schools to be made compulsory. It's a very simple thing to do. It's a very simple safety feature which would negate the possibility of cars parking and children rushing out of school and moving out between cars. And at the time, there were only 8 schools in Lincolnshire which had compulsory zigzags. I'd like to know why, what justification this council can have for refusing to make zigzags compulsory outside school. And if there are still voluntary zigzags outside school, could we pursue this as a safety measure, please? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. That's school safety zones you're referring to there. Over to you, Steve.
Yep, thank you very much, Councillor. As you highlight in regards to targets, our view clearly is that any fatality, any serious injury is unacceptable, and we will do all we can to try and reduce that. I think operationally it's really important that we strive to see continual reductions. I think that needs to ensure that resources are forthcoming and that we're really focused on targeting the areas where the risk is highest, and so that can be really useful to us, but it does differ to how we report things to the committee. In terms of the secondary school children, I think it's a really important point that you've raised there. Not only is the spatial awareness different at that age, perception of risk doesn't develop in the brain until later on as well. And so as we move from primary into secondary school, we are looking at different challenges, as I mentioned previously, with regard to them having much more independence when they are moving to school and going out and socialising with friends, etc. So absolutely vital that we do provide education and resources to assist with helping them identify and understand risk. And I think it also comes back to my previous points around pedal cyclists, in that you've highlighted that whilst we know how pedestrians and pedal cyclists should behave, or we would like to see them behave, sometimes that isn't the case. And because they are vulnerable on the roads, and because we are using, very fast moving and heavy vehicles, it's really important that all road users are consistently aware of the risks of what's going on around them and expect people to do things that they probably wouldn't or shouldn't be doing on the roads. So I think that's really important. In regard to zigzags outside schools, that's a highways issue. It's not something I have responsibility for in general terms in the Road Safety Partnership, but we do outline school safety zone locations where we think there could be some benefit. That of course, the aim of that scheme is to do exactly what you've highlighted, and that is to clear the space outside of the schools, reduce the speeds, and again just highlight the dangers of what's going on. And that process again is something that we're constantly looking at when it comes to schools, where we highlight specific needs and problems. But in terms of the general policy on whether zigzags should be put in, that's not something I have responsibility for.
Chairman, may I come back briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Please,
okay.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, I do understand it's a highways issue, and it was something I raised constantly. But the thing is, if the zigzags are there, that means they're necessary. And therefore, if they're necessary, they should be compulsory, because you're going to get somebody who's going to ignore it. That then is an unnecessary risk to a child. And I wonder if it would be reasonable to ask the Road Safety Partnership to actually put pressure on highways to make them compulsory, because otherwise, why are they there? If they're not needed, they wouldn't put the paint down. So it's, I feel strongly about it because I've repeatedly asked for certain zigzags outside schools in my division to be made compulsory, having seen some very, very nasty moments. Although since COVID, that has improved significantly. I don't know if the behaviour will remain different or it'll gradually slip back to pre-COVID behaviours. There's certainly been an increase in awareness for some reason. But it is something I would like to see sort of battered against until every school gets the same protection. Why should 8 schools have it and not the rest of the schools? You know, how can that be justified? So maybe it's something that the Road Safety Partnership could consider pressuring highways over. Thanks ever so much, Chairman.
Good point, Councillor Brockway. Would you like to come back on that, Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say that I'm happy to liaise with my colleagues within highways and look into this issue further and then report back at the subsequent meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that.
you.
I think also regards the zigzags, there's some places where they've actually got them and they've almost worn away, so much so that people parking the cars tending to ignore them. But so I think there's a certain amount of the zigzags need refreshing within the county. Over to Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. Appreciating I'm here for one meeting only, I would add my profound support to the comment of yourself and Councillor Brockway in respect of it's something that I come across in my own division, and just generally to support that. Picking up on page 58, I've just a couple of questions. Looking at the graph at the top, do we know what changed after 2015? The trend appeared up to that point to be going in the right way on both of those graphs, and since then it has gone the wrong way. And secondly, in respect of the chart at the bottom of the page comparing Lincolnshire to other counties, I always wonder whether this benchmarking of Lincolnshire against other county areas is necessarily fair or gives a particularly accurate result for Lincolnshire, given that we are always saying that we have 5,500 miles of road, and quite a lot of those are going to be of a rural nature. It would be really interesting if the figures existed, and I don't know whether they do, to look at how Lincolnshire compares on its A roads to, say, Devon, North Yorkshire, Northumberland, Norfolk, etc., and the same across B, C and unclassified. Because are we saying that Lincolnshire's roads are per se more dangerous than our neighbours, or do we simply have more of them, or do we have more of a particularly dangerous type? I genuinely don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether we do, but whether drilling into those figures on that depth would actually give us a more accurate reflection of what the situation is here compared to elsewhere.
Thank you. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Councillor. With regard to the first point, from about mid-2016 onwards, the way in which Stats 19, which is the form that police fill in order to provide information of an injury collision, changed from paper recording to electronic recording, and that came in over a period of time, so it wasn't an instantaneous thing in Lincolnshire. But what happened there is that on the electronic forms, every injury type is sort of classified specifically into clearly fatal, serious and slight. So if you were to click a particular injury, for example, a broken digit, that would automatically make it into a serious. Now, previously, when it was the officer on the side of the road doing that in paper format, they were making a degree of a judgment. So they would look into the collision, and at that stage, it might appear overall to be a slight collision without a serious injury. Some of them are clearly classified as there. So there was a bit more of a grey area, and so it meant that probably more injury types were classed as a slight injury. As we moved into the electronic form, we saw an increase in the number of incidents that were recorded as a serious, and a subsequent decrease in the number that was recorded as a slight. What I would say is that it probably provides very much a better data to us, which is more accurate with regard to how injuries are classified, but it makes it very difficult to make a direct comparison to the way in which it happened in previous years. And that's something that's occurred across the UK, but that accounts for that change. There was a stepped increase in the number of serious collisions at that time, whilst the actual number of collisions overall didn't change. With regard to the second point, yeah, it's very difficult for us to make a direct comparison to other counties. We do have particular challenges, as you've highlighted, one of the longest road networks in the country, the vast majority of which are single carriageway, lots of national speed limit roads, very little amount of dual carriageway, a particularly difficult mix of vehicles, good motorcycle routes, people from outside of the county coming here for tourism reasons, clearly a lot of agriculture, etc. And bringing all those things together in this county does present a higher degree of risk than in some other areas, and it's hard to make a comparison. We try to use counties that are broadly similar or provide some of the same characteristics. We can and do look into a wide number in our annual report of different metrics and measures. What I will look at is whether we can do that per class of road. I'll need to come back and see whether that's going to be feasible there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr. Clark.
Hello there. Obviously, we were discussing about the fatalities on the road, none of which are welcomed. And we need to try our best to reduce those with whatever means we can with road safety. Where I live, we often see the helicopters taking off and obviously rushing off to a traffic accident. By any chance, do we know the benefits? Obviously, we know there are benefits for helicopters, but do we know, or have we got any stats that show by them attending, we've actually managed to save lives? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if that comes under your remit, Steve, but over to you.
No, unfortunately, Councillor, I don't have that information. I would imagine it would be incredibly difficult to say whether or not that attendance alone made the difference. But what we can say is that there are going to be many examples when the emergency services attending quickly and efficiently have made a significant difference and save lives on a daily basis. And I would imagine it would be no different from using the ambicopter as well. But unfortunately, I don't have that information. But I will see whether or not that's something that I can find out.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
I think that concludes the comments on that topic. So we'll move on to trading standards, which starts on page 61. So I think that's probably back over to you, Di.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so there was just one particular area I was going to draw your attention to, which is on page, page 65, which is the high-risk premises inspected by trading standards. You'll see that there is a target set for that one of 63 for this quarter, and that wasn't achieved. The reason being is that a number of our trading standards officers were occupied elsewhere with another high-risk issue. We hoped at the time of writing this that we would be able to recover those that weren't inspected in the next quarter. However, the only caveat that I would put on that is we are, as Councillor McNally updated at the start of the meeting, dealing with a avian flu outbreak. So that will also take up some of our trading standards officers' time. And obviously, we have to keep a watchful eye on what comes with the Omicron variant and whether that impacts on trading standards moving forward as well. So we are hopeful, with all things being equal, that we will be able to get that back on track. But obviously, as I say, the caveat to that being we've got to monitor these other issues that are ongoing at the moment. So that was really the only area that I would bring to your attention today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. The first thing is some of our shops in our town, Boston, they have very poor labeling. So we don't know what's the price. So when you buy an item, you go to the till, and from different times you get different prices, different till assistant. That's one thing. The second thing is most of the products you cannot read the ingredients, which will become a high risk for anybody buying a product from these shops because they're written in Russian or different language. So if somebody has an allergy, I mean, God help them and God save them, we will not know what happens. And I think, I'm not going to say it's a failure for our trading standards, but it should be monitored. And I think I will emphasize on the word, we should do better. And I think that's probably should apply on our local government as well. Any product coming from abroad should be having a sticker written in English, so people who go to these places can read what's the ingredient. And most of the time when you ask the shop assistants, some of them, they don't have that much knowledge themselves or that much vocabulary to use to explain to you what's in the product. For example, I buy a can of sort of bread, and it's called borak. It's Turkish, and it's something light, but they fill it with a sort of cheese that the shop assistant, they don't know what cheese is it, if it's cottage cheese or goat cheese, or they just say cheese. And as we know, there's a lot of people that have allergies to cheese. So are we doing anything about this? As I say, we should really commit ourselves and do more, because I think it's just about time that somebody will get probably a bad reaction of an allergy and it may end up in hospital. Thank you.
Over to you, Di, for your thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think you flag a really relevant point, particularly in terms of the allergies and knowing what is contained within a product. I'm more than happy to take that back to the team and just understand what processes are in place currently, and look at what we can do to better look at that issue. Because, as you rightly point out, there are some significant potential health risks without if people don't know what's contained within the product. So I'm more than happy to take that away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go take Councillor Brockway first, and I'll come back to you. Okay, Councillor Danny then. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. I haven't got an answer about the pricing because most of their products on the shelves, they don't have any prices.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. It's something I've mentioned before, but I just want to raise it again in a different context. On page 60, it's talking... hang on, no, I've got the wrong, sorry. Oh, right, page 62, apologies. It's not appropriate to set a target for this measure. Now, I know I've mentioned it, but I want to raise it again because it's actually important, and I just want to expand a little bit. Targets are constructs, and when you set a target for something, quite often people will work towards the target. And when you're talking actually about safety things and health and safety, working towards a target can have a very negative effect and can be dangerous because once the target is achieved, there can be a tendency for people to relax. I've got a relative actually who is an assistant director of a hospice, and they have to do the funding, and once they've achieved their target, this relative sees a relaxing in the staff, whereas really if the target wasn't there and they had to keep going and going and going, she feels that they would continue at the same level as previously. So there is a subtle change in the reports that we're getting through now, and I think it's a very important feature because what it's doing, it's showing us that targets are not always appropriate, that there are subtleties, that there are contexts, and it's kind of brave to be doing this because there is a societal pressure to actually go for targets all the time. So I have to congratulate the people who are writing these reports. I feel you stepped it up and stepped it on in a way that is increasing potential safety for residents. I'm actually very happy about this, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Di, do you wish to comment on that?
No, well, other than say thank you, Councillor Brockway. I think I'm in full agreement with you. Targets can have a very unhealthy approach to the work that's in question. I won't repeat what you said, but no, happy with your comments and thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, oh, sorry, Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much. On page 61, you show a chart there which shows the success rate on the seizure of illegal or illicit alcohol and tobacco. They look fine statistics, but do we know how many of those actually lead to a prosecution?
Over to you, Di.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Certainly all of those seizures will be investigated, and where we can prosecute, we will. But if you would like the details of that, I can certainly get those forwarded through.
Certainly going forward, I think it would be very useful. That success rate looks very good indeed, but whether it actually results in people, you know, going through the courts and being convicted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further comments on this subject. We'll turn to the final topic in the statistics, that is volunteering. So over to you, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, committee. Lee Sturdyfield, I'm the Assistant Director for Corporate Services. There's two indicators here for you to consider today. The first is about the number of voluntary and community groups that have been supported by the CVS and LCVS. You'll see that as per previous quarters, that's continued to exceed the target set. The support has focused on areas such as practical advice and resources for those groups, access to funding and funding advice, support with things like DBS checks, and also online training for volunteers. Within the quarter, we've seen 10 funding ready workshops be provided to 21 community organisations with a spread of representatives from across the county, and CVS and LCVS have been able to lever in around about £500,000 worth of funding into the county through their funding activities. And so I think that's a really strong position for them to be in. In terms of those the volunteers that have come forward, Again, that has continued to exceed the target, with 465 people now having access to volunteering opportunities. We've discussed previously the vital role that volunteers have had in supporting efforts around the pandemic, and that's continued to be the case. What we have seen through Q2 is a reduction in volunteering requirements around some of the COVID vaccination centres. Clearly, the position for that has now changed, and we're actively engaged with VCS, LCVS and a number of other volunteer organisations to help NHS colleagues step back up the vaccination support activities, and that work continues with support from LRF colleagues. What we've also seen is more people coming forward asking for trustees, and traditional volunteering opportunities start to resume. So if you remember previously, we've discussed that some organisations hadn't come back into full operation. We're now starting to see that happen, and those traditional volunteering opportunities come through. What we've also got is work underway now to review the way that volunteers are recruited, managed and supported, and the voluntary engagement team is working with the VCS colleagues and with LRF and ourselves to develop improved solutions to enable volunteers to be matched to opportunities, but also to remove some of the barriers that may slow down the ability to access opportunities or indeed engage with volunteering opportunities. And we'd be quite happy in March of next year to bring a paper to this committee to update on that development work and how we see volunteers being supported in the future. So that's hopefully a useful update in terms of the activities over the last quarter and indeed what's happening in the future, but more than happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Okay, Lee, thank you. Councillor Mr. Clark.
Yes, it's very good reading, and I would like to commend all those who do volunteer throughout the county, providing a very valuable service. Do we offer any backup, as it were, for their mental health, or do we just expect them to find their own support if they need it? Thank you.
Over to you, Lee.
Okay, so the Voluntary Service Centre and the Lincolnshire Voluntary Service Centre provide a range of volunteering support to volunteers, and that includes some elements of mental health provision. What we're seeking to do in January is survey those that have been volunteering over the last couple of years to understand whether they are going to be doing that on an ongoing basis and some of the challenges they have. And the aim from that is to then start to tailor better support packages around those volunteers' needs. And I'd expect that will have a focus in some part on mental health. But there is certainly some support there at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed for that.
Okay, thank you. I have no further speakers, so I'll just refer us to the actions of this report. Members of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee are invited to review and comment on the performance information contained in this report and highlight any recommendations or further actions for consideration. I believe we've done that, so I move that the committee receive the report and are satisfied with the overall performance of services reported for Q2. Can you please raise your hands if you agree? Thank you, that is agreed. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the Lincolnshire Coroner's Service Annual Report. This item is on pages 27 to 54 of the agenda pack and invites the committee to consider and comment on the Lincolnshire Coroner's Service Annual Report. The report will be presented by Paul Smith, Acting Senior Coroner, and James Chappell, Head of Registration and Coroner's Services via Teams. Just to say, the actions of this committee were invited to review and note the progress and performance of the service and consider timescales for further reports and actions. So over to you, Paul and James.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paul Smith, Acting Senior Coroner for Lincolnshire, and it falls to me today to present the report for 2020. It is, I'm afraid, a little historic, but 2020 represents the last complete year for which I have statistics. And Mr. Chairman, at risk of putting the cart before the horse, can I say that at the end of my presentation this morning, I'm going to invite you to ask me back next summer when I will have the 2021 figures. They're normally produced against the national figures in the late spring, early summer. And I hope at that stage the report that I can produce will be a little more timely. In relation to 2020, when I first put pen to paper in relation to this report, or whatever the digital equivalent may be, a number of things occurred to me. First of all, the inescapable start would be the pandemic and the many and varied ways in which the pandemic has impacted upon the coronial service. Secondly, I became aware of the extent to which those pressures were amplified by the historical loss of key personnel within the coroner service and also the departure of the senior coroner Timothy Brennan in the summer of 2020. Thirdly, despite that, I noted with some pleasure that during 2020, the volume of completed cases concluded by the Lincolnshire Coroner Service was greater than that ever previously achieved. Mr. Chairman, in relation to the figures, the committee have those within the report. I'm not going to dwell on them particularly. If I can take you, if I may, to section 1.5 of that report and the spreadsheet. Very simply, you will note that although the number of deaths registered within the county increased, as one would have expected, the number of coronial referrals remained broadly constant, 3275 against 3242 the previous year. Against those numbers of referrals, a total of 405 inquests were completed against a figure of 376 the previous year. In relation to those completed inquests, and with the very significant caveat that it is a comparatively small sample, I simply highlight two things. First of all, that the number of recorded suicides was noted to increase significantly. There were 75 such conclusions in 2020 against 45 similar conclusions in 2019. And secondly, the decline in the number of road traffic deaths, 17 recorded against 34 in 2019. The first of those figures in relation to suicides is perhaps reflective of the hidden cost of the pandemic. The second figure in relation to road traffic collisions, I perhaps rather naively attributed to the lockdown and the reduced volume of vehicles on the road. Having heard what Stephen Batchelor said today on further reflection, I think that may be a statistical anomaly and reflects the nature and type of hearings we were able to conduct. As I will indicate in a minute, we were unable to have live attendees at witnesses for a large section of 2020. And given that I would very rarely conclude a road traffic collision case in the absence of a forensic collision investigator to give evidence, I suspect that figure reflects the nature of cases that were heard rather than a more significant picture. As I indicate, Mr. Chairman, during the course of 2020, my service completed a total of 405 inquests. In addition to that figure, a further 20 cases were permanently suspended and not resumed following the intervention of the criminal process. And given all the difficulties which the service faced throughout the year, that I think bears testament to the commitment and dedication of my staff, without whom I would be found severely wanting. In relation to the difficulties posed by the pandemic, they were, of course, all essentially practical in nature. As my report indicates, even before the first lockdown was announced, we were encountering requests from members of families to adjourn hearings to avoid the need for them to travel. Many families were shielding and did not want to attend a public hearing. The onset of the first wave and the first lockdown brought into sharp focus the perennial issue of coronial accommodation. I spoke last year about the loss of the Cathedral Centre as a venue in 2019. That was reinstated in October or thereabouts of 2019 and became our regular home for coroners' courts. That facility was closed in March of 2020, leaving the only remaining facility open to us of the ceremony room at number 4 Linden Road. That, of course, formed part of the local authority estate, and when the pandemic bit, that was closed to members of the public. The net effect of that, Mr. Chairman, was to leave the coroner service with a total absence of courtrooms. We had no courtrooms at all between the middle of March and the middle of June, and as a consequence, we were unable to conduct any inquests throughout that period. During the course of June, the then senior coroner, Mr. Brennan, reached an agreement with the local authority to allow the use of the ceremony room at Linden Road for cases within which no public attendance was anticipated. With the agreement of many families, a number of cases were conducted on paper, in essence, in the absence of attendees, in the absence of witnesses, and members of the families agreeing that cases could proceed in their absence were provided with a copy of the recording after the event if they wished. In September of 2020, the facility at the Mile Cross Centre was first provided to the coroner service. By that stage, we had a backlog of around 400 outstanding inquests. The provision of the facility at Mile Cross enabled us to run to pop-up courts effectively in former classrooms, each of those being limited in size, and as a consequence, each courtroom was limited to a total of 12 attendees. By the end of 2020, and having seized the opportunity to have a court facility available 5 days a week if necessary, we had reduced the number of outstanding inquests from 400 to 300, although that is something of an artificial figure, failing to recognise those that remained within the backlog were largely the longer inquests, the more complex inquests, and those which required hearing in front of a jury. No jury cases were possible between March 2020 and October of 2021. One of the tools in our armoury to move the backlog was the move towards remote hearings. As a service, as we moved out of the first wave, we received national guidance from the Chief Coroner, who encouraged us to adopt the practice and facility of having interested persons and witnesses attend remotely via Microsoft Teams. By a quirk of legislation, a coroner is always required to sit in an open public courtroom, and likewise there is no provision in law for members of the press or casual observers to view inquest proceedings remotely. That is a facility which remains available only for those participating either as an interested person or a witness. For those who wish to attend and observe, their options remain physical attendance or an audio-only feed. Despite those restrictions, a large number of inquests were completed in that way, and IT issues apart, were completed successfully. Excuse me. Towards the end of 2020, we moved to obtain the IT functionality to allow us to combine remote attendances with others who chose to attend the hearing, so that everybody could see and hear each other, and orders were placed for the appropriate equipment, which was ultimately installed in the spring of 2021. One of the major difficulties posed by the pandemic has been the ability of my service to obtain statements and reports from healthcare professionals. Clearly, without that evidence is available, many cases cannot be listed, completed and heard. And clearly, the requirement on healthcare professionals to produce such reports has to be considered alongside the unprecedented pressure placed on the NHS by the pandemic. I am aware that certainly locally within the local hospital trust, clinicians have had their admin time removed so that they can concentrate on clinical duties. That's a decision taken very many months ago. That impacted on their ability to produce evidence. Likewise, members of staff themselves were on occasions absent from work, whether through ill health or having been pinged or requiring to self-isolate. And overall, I took the view that common sense dictated that when the NHS was under such immense pressure, clinicians' time was far better spent than treating their patients rather than writing reports for me. And as a consequence, such reports were not, or the requirement for such reports was not enforced as we had chosen to do previously. When statements and reports were provided, similar issues, of course, arose in relation to the attendance of witnesses at inquests. And again, that has served to increase the backlog which we have. The issue is one which is known to the local hospital trust. I've met with them and discussed that. I have received assurances that steps are being taken in order to address that, but it is an issue which persists and an issue which is unlikely to be resolved in the immediate future. As a consequence of those matters, sadly, the average time to progress these cases to inquest has slipped rather. The final specific difficulty that we encountered, and it's not one I intend to dwell on today, was the loss of a full-time coroner in the summer of 2020. That was less of an issue in 2020 as it has proved subsequently, but it is a loss which has been keenly felt. I'm aware, of course, that the timescale for the appointment of a replacement full-time coroner is linked inextricably to the possible merger with North Lincolnshire and Grimsby. I'm aware that everything that has been required locally has been done and that a decision now vests or remains with the Chief Coroner and with the Lord Chancellor's Department. Despite pressure having been brought to bear, it appears that matters are proceeding at a glacial pace at that level. Mr. Chairman, I've no wish to repeat what I said last year about earlier events, or indeed to foreshadow what I anticipate I will wish to say next year in relation to 2021. What I would suggest is that the committee invite me back in, say, July of next year. At that stage, I hope that I will have the 2021 figures hot off the press to give to the committee. I hope I will have information to give you in relation to a potential merger. I will be able to tell you about the benefits of the transformation project, which we completed successfully earlier this year, about our move to a permanent home at Mile Cross, our appointments of a head of service and coroner services manager. But against those positive features, I will be able to tell you all also about the operational challenges which the service continues to face as the pandemic continues. Mr. Chairman, that's all I wish to say at this stage, but I will of course be happy to take any questions which the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Paul. Do we have James Chappell? I believe he's on Teams. Does he wish to present anything at this stage?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No comment from me.
Okay, thank you. Over to members. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you ever so much for that report. Very, very interesting. And you've obviously been operating under some very difficult circumstances during the period. If I can actually take you back to your spreadsheet, please. I think this is actually offers us more information than at first appears to be the case. So it tells us the breakdown of different reasons for deaths. But if you look at part way down the list, it talks about death from industrial diseases. It's slightly worrying to see that those have increased. Now, if I ask questions, and I will ask in a moment, it is possible that as people who've got historic diseases from asbestos and things like that, now that they're getting older, could be passing on. But it is a slightly worrying statistic that industrial diseases have increased, even just by 5 people. That's 5 too many. Also, the statistic, death by accident or misadventure. Now, that's separate from road traffic collisions. And 71 people died from accident or misadventure. And that's a statistic I'd be very interested in finding out a bit more about, because that's a lot of deaths. And the one other point I just wanted to ask about, so this is a question, at the bottom of the spreadsheet, it talks about all other conclusions, and there were 129 deaths under this category. Is it possible just to find out a tiny bit more about what the other conclusions were, please? Thank you ever so much.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brockway. Paul, are you able to come back and answer those questions, please?
Yeah, certainly. If I can start, if I may, with the industrial disease, it's a fairly modest increase year on year. My area, of course, covers the East Coast, and we have a large retirement population over there, many of whom retired from the coalfields of the Midlands or having historically had employment in industry. I don't think there is anything too unusual in those figures, particularly when you look at the national average of 9% of industrial disease deaths. We're sitting there at between 7 and 8%. So I don't think there is anything in there which is alarming. In relation to the conclusion of accident, I'm not in a position to give you a breakdown of exactly the circumstances of each of those. But I'm sure that if you wish to take that up with me beyond this meeting, some further information could be provided to you. In relation to all other conclusions, the majority of those will be narrative conclusions. Without drilling down too much into the Coroners and Justice Act, there is a schedule of short form conclusions, which are in the main those listed within the box at 1.5. There are a few minor conclusions which are rarely, if ever, used, which have not been specifically isolated. But as a coroner, I'm not bound by the short form conclusion. I can go effectively off-piste, if you will, and express the circumstances of a death in terms which don't really fit a particular label. So it may be, for example, that I have somebody who dies as a result of an excess of prescribed medication. I may be satisfied that they have taken too many tablets, but I simply don't know whether they've taken too many tablets because they're suffering chronic pain and it's an error of judgment, or whether it's because they're suffering chronic pain and they've made the decision on the spur of the moment to end their own life. Both may be possible under the evidence I have. Under those circumstances, I would ordinarily return a narrative conclusion, which would say that so-and-so died as a consequence of taking an excess of their prescribed medication, but that the evidence does not identify their intention at that time. That will be the sort of conclusion which would fit. Equally, there may be cases within which the circumstances straddle one or more labels. I may have somebody who died from a naturally occurring disease or process, but to which the consequences of an earlier accident made a contribution. I would normally deal with that by narrative rather than by way of a short form conclusion. Equally, there may well be cases within which people have been quite properly treated by the clinicians at the hospital. But the unintended consequences of surgery is that whilst the initial injury or the initial illness is resolved, they go on to develop a complication. Again, I would deal with that by way of a narrative conclusion. I do have a reputation, I'm bound to say locally, of liking my narrative conclusions rather than my labels. Sometimes, in my judgment, labels are suffer from a tendency to have square pegs put in round holes. So I do tend to prefer a narrative conclusion which gives clarity to those looking at the documentation in future years. But those are, I think, appropriate examples of what that figure may encompass.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. Just picking up on the shortfall of one member of staff or a coroner. Do we know why it's taking such a long time for this to work its way through the Ministry of Justice? And assuming that does all get sorted, will that tie up with North and North East links effectively solve that problem by effectively those two areas having a surplus that will help with Lincolnshire? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul.
Believe me, there is no surplus coroner cover in North Lincolnshire. They have recently had their acting senior coroner retire, and as you will hear, next year I have been asked to cover that area. I go there every Friday. I'm there 1 day a week, so I'm acting senior coroner for North Lincs and Grimsby as well as Lincolnshire, which puts additional pressure on my time. In relation to the delay, I can't explain it first and foremost, but what I can say is that the way in which the process works is that North Lincs and Grimsby have been told that they are not large enough to have their own coroner, hence they have to merge. There is a potential with the merging with Lincolnshire, there is a potential merging with Yorkshire or East Yorkshire and Hull. And ultimately, the Chief Coroner will have to make a determination on the competing applications, and he will then, as I understand it, make a recommendation to the Lord Chancellor's Department. It's not something which falls within the umbrella of the Ministry of Justice. Quite why it's taking so long, I really don't know. All I do know is that we have done everything that has been asked of us, and I am aware that James Chappell is continually pressuring the Chief Coroner for an indication, because clearly we are working with one hand tied behind our back locally until we know which way we're going to go, whether we're going to be part of a much larger area or if we're not, but we need to know in order to start planning for the future.
Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much. Going forward, do you think you'll be using IT to a greater extent in order to process quickly?
IT will be used. Again, you will hear me say next year that I've got one new courtroom now at Mile Cross, which has the facility for witnesses and interested persons to attend remotely. I think there's some work needs to be done on the hard wiring before that is complete, but we have a working solution at present. The difficulty that I find is that inquest hearings tend not to lend themselves particularly to people attending virtually. They're a very sensitive and a very delicate type of hearing. Certain cases are suited, certain cases are not. So it's a tool in my armoury, but I don't consider it's going to be a panacea in reducing the overall backlog. A case which takes half a day is still going to take half a day, whether people are there in the flesh or whether they attend by teams.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I appreciate your remit is largely concerning deaths occurring in Lincolnshire, but I always wrestle with the figures a little bit. For instance, you could have a Lincs resident who's, say, dies in Peterborough Hospital, and clearly they're registered in that authority. Conversely, you could have someone on holiday here in Lincolnshire who's come from, like you say, the Midlands or wherever, and they're registered here. Is there anywhere that tells us how many Lincolnshire residents actually die each year?
Not within my statistics, Mr. Chairman, because my jurisdiction arises when I'm notified of a body lying within my area.
Yeah, sure.
It matters to me little or not where they come from. It's the fact that they are here when the death is reported to me, which triggers my involvement. I don't know whether that's a wider statistical question, which James Chappell from registration can assist with, or whether it's beyond his remit also.
Yeah, sure. Like I said at the outset, it wasn't sort of within your remit
No.
because you're largely with deaths occurring in Lincolnshire, but it may be the Office of National Statistics or something like that. But I'll just go over to James to see if he can shed any light on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In terms of registration, we operate to the same parameters as Paul does with the Colonial Service. I would presume that that data would be held by the Office of National Statistics. I can have a look at that and report back to you if that information is held by them.
Okay, thank you if you could. Just one more from me to Paul. Could you explain to the committee the difference between killed unlawfully and killed lawfully? Neither of them sound too nice, but I'd just like to know the difference.
Unlawful killing is, I mean, they're both thankfully very rare. Unlawful killing is a killing which arises out of the criminal offences of murder or manslaughter. If, for example, there was a murder-suicide, say you had the last one I dealt with was about 18 months ago. It was down in the south of the county where an estranged boyfriend reacted badly to a breakup, broke into a home, and there was a large fire and an explosion. He was responsible for the deaths of not only himself. I was satisfied that was suicide. He was also responsible for the deaths of the two other people, and I was satisfied on balance of probabilities that had he survived, he would have been liable to be convicted of murder in relation to their deaths. Lawful killing is even more rare. That is a conclusion which would be appropriate if I was satisfied that somebody had been killed through the legitimate and proportionate use of force. So if, for example, it would be by way of example, a police shooting of an armed man, something of that nature. Thankfully, not something I've ever encountered, nor do I have any particular wish to have any encounter of that type. But that's the sort of case that would fit.
Thank you. That makes it clearer. Any further comments? No, can't see any. So the proposal is that I move that the committee endorse the report and that our comments are recorded and taken under consideration. Can you please raise your hands if you agree? Thank you, that's agreed. I'd just like to thank you, Paul, for the good work you've been doing. You too also, James, and hope you soon get a decision from the Chief Coroner's Office on the proposed merger, and we look forward to seeing you back in the summer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move on to item 8, which is the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 77 to 82 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara, our Scrutiny Officer. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This item enables the committee to consider and comment on the content of its work programme for the coming year to ensure that scrutiny activity is always focused where it can be of greatest benefit. The work programme is being reviewed at each meeting of the committee to ensure that the contents are relevant and will add value to the work of the Council and partners. From the day that this agenda pack has been issued, we've got some additions to the work programme. So, in summary, in the next meeting, January 2022, we will have an additional pre-decision scrutiny report in relation to the registration service fee setting for 2022-2023 to 2024-2025. In April, we will have an item on animal health and welfare enforcement within trading standards, and the last report that we received in relation to this was back in September 2020. In May, we will have an additional item on cyber fraud and the impact on vulnerable individuals during the pandemic. May I just note that in relation to this falls under Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and it will be featured in the next update that we will receive. However, there's going to be a standalone report in relation to this. And as we heard earlier, we will have in March an additional item on volunteers. I will obtain further information in relation to the contents, and I will update the work programme appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chiara. Have we any comments? No? Okay. So I'm going to move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 77 to 82, as well as the additional items highlighted by the scrutiny officer. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you're in agreement, please? Thank you. That's all agreed. We now close this part of the committee. We need to open up as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee. I just wonder if it's an opportune time for us to have a 5-minute comfort break and to grab a mince pie, if you all agree. Okay? We'll see you back here in a bit over 5 minutes. everyone back in the room. So item 9 on the agenda is sitting as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee. So for the next and final item on today's agenda, we'll be discharging our Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee function. It is regarding the adoption and publication of the Domestic Abuse Strategy 2021 to 2024. This is a pre-decision item, and it provides the committee with an overview of the Domestic Abuse Strategy 2021 to 2024 and the County Council's statutory duties under the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. The report was shared with members via email separate to the agenda on the 8th of December, and the decision is being taken by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement sometime between the 16th and the 23rd December. The report will be presented by Jade Thursby, who is the Domestic Abuse Business Manager via Teams. The views of the committee will be reported to the Executive Councillor when she considers a decision between those above-mentioned dates. The actions of this committee were invited to support the recommendation on page 3 of the supplementary documents pack that the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement approves the publication of the Domestic Abuse Strategy as attached at Appendix A. So over to you, Jade.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. I will just talk through, obviously, the report and the strategy, and then obviously open up for any questions. In terms of the report, I hope that it's giving you an overview of the domestic abuse strategy for 2021-24 and the County Council's statutory responsibilities under the new Domestic Abuse Act 2021. In terms of the background, the Domestic Abuse Bill received Royal Assent on the 29th of April 2021 and became a statutory duty for local authorities, Tier 1 local authorities, on the 1st of April 2021. There are a number of changes that are new within the Act and will be delivered through the Act, which is listed throughout the report. Some significant changes around having an actual legal definition of domestic abuse, which recognises children as victims in their own right. A domestic abuse commissioner to stand up for survivors and life-saving domestic abuse services, as well as a number of other sanctions in terms of criminal justice system. But the main duty that the Act and the strategy kind of comes under is Part 4 of the Domestic Abuse Act. There are several elements to that part of the Domestic Abuse Act. There are 4 elements that is a new duty now for Tier 1 local authorities, and that is all focused around accommodation-based services for domestic abuse victims and children. And that one of the areas is to undertake a needs assessment for accommodation-based services, to publish a strategy, to give effect to that strategy through commissioning and decommissioning, and then to monitor, evaluate and report back to central government. And they are kind of our 4 key areas in terms of Part 4 of the Domestic Abuse Act. There, in producing the strategy, Lincolnshire undertook a full needs assessment, including the whole of the domestic abuse agenda, not just limited to accommodation-based services. This was a conscious decision to ensure that Lincolnshire was in a position to respond to the wider domestic abuse agenda, create consistency in service provision and support the interrelated nature of domestic abuse and the needs of service users. We, as a partnership and as a county council, totally understand that these services that are provided for people that are victims and survivors of domestic abuse are interrelated, and one kind of rolls into the other in terms of their need, and therefore felt it was very, very important as a needs assessment not to just focus on accommodation-based services. The needs assessment was undertaken by an independent consultancy, and the Domestic Abuse Partnership was fully consulted throughout that process. And the subsequent strategy that's been produced and developed, which is in Appendix A, has regard to all of those areas that were found within the needs assessment, but also a section around accommodation-based services. In terms of our statutory duty, under Section 57 of the Council, under 57 of that Act, the Council must consult with the Partnership Board any local authority within the area, and such other persons as the council considers appropriate. In doing our needs assessment and strategy, we did consult with the full partnership in terms of that process. The strategy attached at Appendix A has been subject to wide consultation with all of our Tier 2 local authorities, and they do have a duty to cooperate in terms of the new Domestic Abuse Act under Part 4 of the Act, and also, as I said, with the full partnership and service providers within Lincolnshire. Feedback from all partners was received at various stages in the strategy development, of which all comments have been addressed and reflected within the strategy and further down the line within the delivery plan that will be developed over the next few months. A full audit trail of feedback has been documented, and that does form part, as I said, of our delivery plan and commissioning plans for domestic abuse for the future. Survivor engagement has been undertaken through service providers, and the intention as part of the strategy, hopefully you've seen in there, is to develop a robust survivor engagement plan throughout the domestic abuse partnership. The strategy has the general support of the partners within the domestic abuse partnership and the providers consulted. The strategy also has regard to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities guidance, statutory guidance that has been produced in relation to Part 4 of the Domestic Abuse Act. In terms of the actual strategy itself, you'll see that it summarises the national and local context in relation to domestic abuse, sets out our shared ambition and key priorities for Lincolnshire, the Lincolnshire Domestic Abuse Partnership in tackling domestic abuse, and outlines the key areas of action over the next 3 years, including new statutory duties in relation to accommodation-based services. This is an inclusive strategy relevant to all victims of domestic abuse, and it is a duty of Lincolnshire County Council to publish this strategy by the 5th of January 2022. I'd just like to draw your attention to the part in the report about the funding. There was funding allocated to that particular part of the Domestic Abuse Act in relation to accommodation-based services. Lincolnshire County Council was allocated 1.4 million for 2021-22, and each district council was also allocated a slightly different amount, but roughly in the region of around £32,000 each in relation to the same area around accommodation-based services. There will be a separate funding allocation received in 2022-23 and 2023-24. We don't know the amount of that yet, but we know that there will be a separate allocation for those following 2 years, and then after that, that funding allocation will sit within the spending review. And I think in terms of the strategy, other than what I've already summarised, within that strategy, I think it's what most people would expect to see in terms of the content and setting out some of the areas that we know where the needs assessment and gap analysis have been undertaken, and where we now need to go, obviously, in terms of our future commissioning and resourcing within this area. It also sets out our governance and accountability around domestic abuse within Lincolnshire, and how it sits now under a separate domestic abuse partnership, giving it the resource and the focus that obviously this area of work deserves. So I will now open up to any questions from anybody.
Any questions? Councillor, Mr. Clark.
Excuse me. Are you able to tell us the number of safe accommodations that we've got access to throughout the county? And similarly, are you able to tell us if there are plans to provide any more?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Clark. Within the strategy, under the commissioning section, we do set out, in terms of accommodation-based services, the number of current refuge and dispersed accommodation units that we have within the county. Some of those are currently commissioned by Lincolnshire County Council, and some are currently funded through other less sustainable funding sources, but are obviously run by charities very professionally, and have certain standards they have to obviously adhere to. The intention is, through the Domestic Abuse Act and the funding obviously associated with that, that we would be looking at commissioning all of those accommodation-based services for Lincolnshire to ensure that there's that consistency and that standard, obviously, across the county. But also there is going to be a new refuge units and dispersed accommodation, which will be coming into place in March 2022.
Thank you for that. I noticed in the report as well, it highlights that disabled persons might be abused. Is that a major concern, or well, it's always a concern if somebody is being abused, but is that a fairly low figures? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we know we need to work on, and it is in the strategy, is around how we report around domestic abuse, how we collect our data. However, we do know that obviously people that have disabilities, both physical and otherwise, do suffer from domestic abuse. In terms of our figures for Lincolnshire, they're not above average in terms of national figures. However, we know that there's extra complications and extra vulnerabilities when somebody has a disability, and our obviously aim is to make sure that this strategy is inclusive of all people and all victim groups, including people with disabilities.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. I notice that we're below the national average for a number of people. Of those people who speak a foreign language as their main language, 69.3% of those who speak English well, it's below the national average. I'm wondering why it's below the national average. I'm assuming it's partly because of rurality. That may be wrong, in which case perhaps correct me. But I'm wondering also, what is the increased risk to those people? If they're in a rural area, they can't speak English and they can't communicate. That's a kind of worrying scenario. Is there anything we can do to ameliorate that? I mean, could you give me some information on that, please? Because that is slightly worrying. We've got a group of people who are going to find it very difficult to communicate, to get help if they need to. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think in terms of our county, it's the concentration, obviously, in certain parts of our county of people that do not speak English or struggle, obviously, to speak English. We are aware, obviously, of those areas and working really, really closely with our domestic abuse services. What we do make sure is that there are translation services available. Any area of work where we need to do that, we obviously make sure. But I don't think it's just down to obviously our domestic abuse services. It's a collective, as a partnership, and it is something that we're absolutely aware of. We know we want to do more work on this and need to do more work on it. It's on our radar as a very key priority for Lincolnshire in terms of supporting those people to seek help and support. At this moment in time, as I said, we are translating where we can. We're providing that service. We do have particular workers from certain cultural backgrounds working for our services, and they're able to support, obviously, much better in terms of those communities. And as I said, a full action plan from this strategy will be developed to look at those key areas, that being one of them. Councillor Brockway, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can't see any further. Oh, Councillor Clark. Sorry, Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much. I wish to ask a question reference staffing levels within the department. Are we up to full capacity? Have we got vacancies? Are we trying to encourage more younger people to come into this sector, which is obviously very vital in trying to safeguard families and children from being abused? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, there's probably two parts to that. In terms of the partnership team, the central team that works within Lincolnshire County Council, that supports this agenda, that pushes a number of these elements forward, because of the 1.4 million and the new responsibilities, obviously, that we have under those statutory duties, we are expanding that team very slightly to be able to support that extra work that we're going to be having to do. and that is obviously very much welcomed in terms of the workload and the importance of this area to have that extra resource. So that's something that we are doing, and we're recruiting over the next few months into that team. In terms of the actual commission service that we currently commission, and other services within Lincolnshire that are more charity-based organisations in terms of their funding that they currently get, there is staff turnover in some of these areas due to the nature of the work. We do understand, and we do have the background in terms of that staffing levels in terms of our commission service. So if that was, I could get that quite easily for you, so you could see that. But one of the things that we are doing in terms of looking at our recommissioning, we are considering staffing levels, capacity, the difficult subject area obviously that they're having to work with, and also looking at training for future people that may want to come forward in terms of this particular area, but also looking at wages in this particular industry area as well. So all of that is being analysed as part of our recommissioning process that we're currently just starting to go through at the moment.
Thank you for that. And further questioning on from that, support for the staff working in this area, obviously it can be quite emotional. Are we giving them sufficient support? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. That's a really important question. In terms of the partnership team, that's something that is actually being investigated at the moment and being looked at as an option, because whilst we don't work directly with victims or survivors of domestic abuse, obviously we hear and see a lot of information that can be quite traumatising. So that is absolutely being explored, and that support will be available outside of the normal support that people get, obviously working for the county council. In terms of our commission service, there is one-to-one provision within that team, within that service, and they have regular supervision in terms of their, not just the work they're doing, but also their emotional and well-being needs, and that is something that we monitor obviously through our commissioning arrangements as well.
Thank you, glad to hear that.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to bring Councillor Bradwell in now, the Executive Councillor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to just say that obviously, I think for a number of years now we've had a domestic abuse service, and we've had our Eden Links, and that have been working with us with regards to refuge. But I think over the last 12 months, I think Jade and Di would say we have moved at a pace to actually be ready when the new Act came in. And I just wanted to thank Jade and Di and all the other partners as well, because there is I don't know what it is about Lincolnshire, but we have a real good working relationship with our partners. And I think our partners have really stepped up to the mark as well, and, you know, wanting to make services much better for victims. And obviously we work very closely with the police as well. So I just wanted to say thank you, really, because we have been running around the track on this one. I don't think we've been walking at a pace, but obviously we'll come back to members and update them, because it is a very important issue. I think that we need to know that there are services out there for people who need them when they're in a terrible situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bradwell. Have we any further speakers? No, I can't see any. I take it that everyone has read and understood the report, and with that in mind, I'll move that the committee supports the proposed recommendation and agrees to pass on our comments to the Executive Councillor. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Hall. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Can't be anyone against, can't be any abstentions. Okay, thank you. That now brings us to, thank you, Jade, for that report, comprehensive report. That now brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance and your contributions. I'd also like to thank the scrutiny officers here today, Tricia and Kiara Haji Oanu, plus the two personnel at the back. May I take this opportunity to wish you and your families a very merry and healthy festive season and a happy new year. Thank you.